I'd like to say hi to you all. I'm Graham Richardson-Locke. Welcome to our second series of FESPA Coffee Breaks. It's great to be back for the second in our new series. If you joined the last webinar, you'll know that I've broadened my role at FESPA to be Head of Associations and Technical Lead. As a member of the senior management team, I'm responsible for supporting our international member associations and continuing to develop technically useful material to support FESPA's specialty print communities. I'd like to also let you know that I've been working in screen and large format digital printing for more than 35 years. I initially trained as a screen printer, and my career in print has given me experiences in management and directorships in point of sale, textile and military electronics before I came on board and joined the FESPA team. I believe in the value of networking and know that my skills have been enhanced by taking part in a host of events and seminars that have been supported by FESPA over the years. And as an international specialty print trade federation, FESPA continues to focus its efforts on knowledge sharing and community building within the screen and wide format digital print landscape. Since FESPA's foundation 59 years ago, its goal has been to help print businesses using screen and digital printing to advance and take advantage of the latest technologies. We aim to keep today's session to about an hour, as we understand that your time is limited. We hope you'll find benefit from your participation and that you'll get some useful tips to build on that will support you in this disruptive and challenging market. I'm going to share with you now the topic in question slide.
Oh, bear with me, guys. I did have it, but it's somehow disappeared. So give me a second. There we go.
That's the voice of my alter ego, Kellyanne.
Okay, right. I'm coming. Here we go. Apologies for the wait.
No worries. Okay, so as we consider today's session, I'm glad to draw on the knowledge of two printing industry experts, Paul Sherfield, founder and owner of the Missing Horse Consultancy, and Laurel Brunner, who's the managing director of Digital Docs. I'll let them introduce themselves to you in a minute. The topic today is why printing standards matter, getting the benefit of world-class expertise without paying through expensive trial and error. There are many standards that apply to the printing and graphic technologies industry. Well-known ones such as ISO 12647 parts 1 to 9 offer a set of quality control guidelines for printing processes, and ISO 14001 specifies the requirements for an effective environmental management system. Implementing them requires a good deal of effort, but working to meet the requirements laid out will allow you to print quality work using methods that have been through a rigorous process of development and approval by international experts. Find out which ones matter and hear from the people who make them happen. So I'm now going to share with you our panelist slide for today. You'll see here our email addresses are all listed on this slide. And that will be available at the end of the session as well. So if you want to get in touch with Laurel, Paul, or myself, please use that as a way to reach us. Okay, Laurel, perhaps you can give an introduction to yourself, and then Paul, if you could follow on, that'd be great.
Okay, good morning, everyone. And thank you very much, Graham and FESPA and Kellyanne for inviting me to participate in this session. My name's Laurel Brunner, and I'm the Managing Director of Digital Docs. I'm mainly a journalist and consultant. I've been in the graphics industry, well, something like 35 years now, and most of my experience has been in digital technologies. I was very much involved in the development and testing of the Macintosh as a platform for publishing applications, and have never looked back. I love this industry. And I guess about 15 years ago, the BSI, the British Standards Institute, asked me to, well, they co-opted me, I didn't have a lot of choice in it really, to contribute to the standards development in the UK, mainly because at the time, the committee locally was entirely made up of people with ink under their fingernails and very little experience of digital technologies. And it's been a really interesting few years. I've learned a lot and I've met some great people, and I'm very happy to see ISO standards being adopted in the marketplace. That's me.
Perfect. Thank you, Laurel. Paul. Oh, Paul.
Paul, you're muted.
Unmute.
I am
Unmute
unmuted.
yourself.
I can't remember where I was now. Yeah, thank you, Graham. Thank you, FESPA, for inviting me once again to talk on a coffee break. My name is Paul Sherfield. I run a workflow, PDF, colour management advisory consultancy. I also serve FESPA as their colour ambassador. I have a background in the industry, mainly sheet-fed litho, through various companies I had known through the 70s, 80s and 90s. And Missing Horse has now been running for over 20 years. In that time, I was also co-opted onto the same committee as Laurel mentioned, because they lacked expertise in what's fast becoming a digital industry. I've been responsible for sitting on a couple of the working groups, which we'll talk about later within ISO, and also run the steering group for the UK certification to colour standards.
Perfect. Thank you, Paul. Okay, so before we get into the questions, I'm just going to launch a poll. So please take a minute to complete the poll on your screen so that we can get a better idea of what type of printers you are. Okay, you should see it now. Thank you. Okay, so we've got 82% of you have completed the poll now, just a few seconds to go. So we have got, of our audience, 29% are involved in screen process printing, 71% digital printing. In terms of activity, we've got a third are involved in some kind of industrial use of these processes. We've got some garment printers, some textile printers, and unsurprisingly, nearly 50% wide format printers and some signage manufacturers. So a good mix is what you'd expect for this topic on standards. Okay, thank you for that. That helps us all. Okay, so without further delay, let's kick off with our first question. Which is, who's involved in the process of creating international standards, and why are standards reliable? So, Laurel, I'm going to ask you to give your view on this question first.
You're muted, Laurel.
I know. Sorry, I was
You guys in the mute button.
excited. Got to press on mute. Okay, sorry. Yes. Well, who's involved in the process of creating international standards? Well, the way ISO works is it's set up as a collection of technical committees. And the one for the graphics industry is Technical Committee 130, TC 130. And it's an international committee made up of representatives of the mirror committees to that committee in, I think we've got 26 participating countries around the world. And in each of those countries, there are groups of experts who contribute to the development of the work. Basically, they read the documents as they're being developed, they critique them, they talk about what's important in their particular country, and then that gets fed back to to TC 130, and all of those views and opinions are taken into account. And we have a long and slow process because of the number of people and ideas and opinions that get included. And somebody once said to me, actually, ISO processes are not slow. They go as quickly as the capacity to do the work can go. So you do see some standards that get put through very fast because everyone agrees. The thing that takes time is resolving all of the different opinions. So within that committee, we also have, I think, 10 or 12 working groups and different task forces. And the working groups are dedicated to particular areas of interest. So for example, the working group that I convene, working group 11, all that we care about in that working group is ISO standards that relate to the environmental impact of print. And there are other working groups that deal with color management, that deal with data formats and all that sort of thing. So that's basically how it works. The reason that they're reliable is because of this consensus principle and the fact that there is a really robust mechanism for getting everybody's ideas addressed.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Paul, what would you like to add from your experience of ISO and committee life?
I was just checking I wasn't muted, Graham.
Thank you very much.
We've had a muted morning. Yes, just to add on to what Laurel was saying, the TC 130, Technical Committee 130, has so far created nearly 100 standards. I think it's 96 different standards. And it's interesting to look at where and how they work in relation to other standards that the printing industry may want. And I look on it as three separate areas. There are the sort of management standards which all industries are encouraged to use. You mentioned some in your introduction: 9001 Quality Management Standard, 14001 Environment Management Standard, 27001, which is increasingly important for the printing industry, which is all about security. They are overriding standards which mean all companies may be required to have by their clients. When you look at the 90 odd standards which have been developed over the years by this very robust committee structure, I mean, we're looking at hundreds of experts from all sorts of areas, suppliers, printers, color scientists, people, Adobe who created PDF, they all sit on this group of committees. If you look at those standards, some can actually be implemented directly by printers. We all know probably the 1264-7 range of standards covering virtually every printing method, flexo, screen, and now metal decoration. They can be applied and used to improve your business. But behind of those, there's dozens of standards which you probably don't know you're using. There are standards for PDF, there are standards for color management. There's all sorts of standards working in background in the software and hardware that you use. And also, just finally, interestingly, the TC 130 committee with working group, is it 4 or 5, Laurel, for health and safety? I can never remember. For health and safety, goes into deep detail on health and safety area standards, which are often put into national laws, to protect our industry from badly designed equipment. So it covers a breadth and is working for you often without you really knowing it.
Yeah, it really is the area where the science, the objectivity, the processes are tested to destruction before they're accepted, aren't they, and published. And I think from my point of view, as someone that sits on TC 130 representing FESPA, I'm constantly and consistently impressed by the skills and talent that sits in the room. And I know that for the two of you who have spent more time in the international environment, seeing that replicated across borders is it is remarkably important how this contributes to the industry. And as you say, Paul, sometimes in a way that we kind of take for granted, but it's all there humming away in the background.
If I know, just to add one thing, Graham, sorry.
Yeah,
But
please.
it's interesting just to briefly cover things which are being worked on at the moment. I mean, there's a standard in development for extended gamut printing, CMYK plus orange, green, and violet, because lots of companies are working on it separately, and the TC130 is trying to bring it together with a unified standard so that extended gamut printing can be standardized and people will get the expected result. It has to stay ahead of the game. Sometimes the standards are accused of being too techy, but there's no point in standardizing something which might be wrong, might be out of date very quickly. We have to stay ahead of the industry, not so far ahead as we're incomprehensible, but we need to stay ahead of the industry and provide some direction.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, let's move on to the second question today, and that is it possible to benefit from using standards without actually becoming a certified business? So, Laurel, as you're a new guest, I'm going to ask you to come in on this one first again.
It's quite interesting. The tone of our conversation so far has been fairly lofty and high and clever. And actually, standards are not necessarily about all of the really hard technical stuff. Everything that you do in a successful business is about risk mitigation. So you will, in your own business, inevitably have standards that you follow. You call them standard operating policies, perhaps, or procedures, but they are standards that you expect your staff and your customers as well to follow, because you want to minimize risk in the work that you're doing. You want to make sure that your products don't have to be remade because you haven't done them properly. Well, think in terms of that. And do you need to be certified for that? No, of course not. You don't need someone to come and tell you that your business is failing, because it will fail by itself, and that's a fairly salutary thing. When it comes to ISO standards, you also don't absolutely have to have certification. What matters is compliance, is understanding what the standard says and following it. You might find that it's much easier to take, for example, 14001, which is the environmental management standard. You might find it's easier to just start with little bits of it and start implementing things and adapting your processes so that you start to take advantage of the standard. The time that you do need certification is if you are trying to work with government procurement, for example, with ISO 12647 Part 2, or a big brand who might expect you to follow 12647 Part 6, which is the Flexo standard, if you're doing a lot of Flexo printing and they want to be sure that you're following processes properly. But you absolutely do not have to be certified. Compliance is what matters.
Okay, thank you. Paul.
Oh, follow that, yes. With any standard, you can tick the boxes and think you're doing it correctly, especially the management standards like 9001, 14001, because to a degree you set your own objectives. But if you use it correctly and implement any standard correctly, you will get a very firm return on investment. And I think that's, whether you're certified or whether you're not. Interestingly, ISO itself, within a standard, cannot mandate certification. But outside of that, there are 3 levels of certification that seem to be recognized. There's first party certification, where a company can state, we print to this standard, our security is to this standard. And they can quite happily say that. Nobody can stop them saying it. It's called self-certification. Of course, what a client can come in and do and say is to say, prove it. Show me your documentation. And many clients do their own assessment on the side of supposed certifications. There's a sort of middle range certification, sometimes called second party certification, and it's typically supplied by a supplier or a consultant who will go in, help the company through implementing a standard, and then give them some sort of certificate saying this, you are compliant. Again, perfectly acceptable, perfectly legal, but what most brands are looking for is third-party certification, where you're certified by a third party, an independent body. We might talk more about that later. And that's what they're looking for. They're looking for that certificate. And maybe in the next area, we can look at what brands actually require for your certification. I mean, that's the most valuable one, because somebody outside is telling you that your systems are working okay.
Again, it's about risk mitigation for large brands and making sure that they get what they expected.
It's on the large brand side, but when you're looking at product certifications, whatever it is, for digital, for litho, you will get the return on investment if you apply those standards yourself correctly.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Paul.
The other point about the third-party certification is that the bodies that give that certification are themselves audited. In the UK, we have an accreditation service, the UCAS, which is part of an international accreditation forum. So it is as robust as it can possibly be.
Okay, thank you. Okay, on to our third question. So yeah, as you say, moving on to brands. In some cases, large brands won't approve suppliers unless they have ISO 9001 and 14001, along with more specific production-related standards. If we're ambitious, where's the best place to get started in your view? I think this one I'm going to let either of you decide who goes first.
I'll go first then. Well, by the standard you're interested in is the best place to start.
Okay, makes sense.
You know, you can buy them through BSI, you can buy them through ISO. They might look a bit expensive, but they're a few tens of pounds. They're not normally hundreds of pounds.
Yeah.
They will be written in an English, which is sometimes called ISOEs, but they need reading and understanding. And then you've got to look at your own internal structures. I mean, do you have the people that can implement it? I mean, large companies sometimes have a standards manager or even a standards department who understand the process of implementing a standard and getting it certified. You might need to look for outside help. Many of our trade operations offer that outside help. FESPA do, I guess. Well, I know they do, and can point you in the right direction and even point you to specific consultants in different areas if you need that sort of help. But it would usually start with a gap analysis. Whatever the standard is, you're looking at what areas you actually may be good at within the documentation and what areas you're not good at and what sort of help you need. If it's a technical standard like 1264-7, whether it's screen, litho or flexo, then you will need to say, have I got the right equipment? Are my staff trained well enough? Are we capable of writing the very simple documentation? It needs to be understood that with the latest changes to all these standards, they're written in a very similar way, and the level of documentation in the latest releases of 9001, 14001 is vastly reduced. So it's really looking at the gaps you have and understanding those gaps and deciding how you want to fill them.
Okay, thanks, Paul. Laurel, where are you on this question?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing is if you've got a customer who wants you to have 9001 and 14001, you do need to take it very seriously, because they're making that request because they want to mitigate risk when they're dealing with your company, and they use 9001, 14001, 12647, all of them as a kind of benchmark. So if you don't have those standards, they don't really want to talk to you because they know that the conversation is going to be rather different than if you do have the standards. I would suggest, as Paul says, you buy the standard, read it, understand it, and then start to audit your business. Start with the workflows that you've got. Look at failure rates, for example, look at remake rates. Try and, as much as you can, quantify the strengths and weaknesses that you've got, including customers, for example. You might have some really, really great customers who are an absolute dream to deal with. You might have some really, really difficult customers. What can you learn from both of them? The ones who are a dream to deal with just might not care that much. And the ones who appear to be difficult might have standards of their own that you are not necessarily living up to. So all of these things are indicators of the strength of your business, of where you are compared to where a standard might take you. And don't get confused between management standards, which are process management, and product standards, which are the things that control the quality of your products. And as Paul says, it's a lot of people get outside help for this sort of thing. I think it's very, very important before you do that to know exactly what it is you're doing, to understand what it is you're buying if you're going to get an outsider in, because a lot of this, if you put the time and the resources into it, you can start to get going really quite well on your own.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, so if you're a smaller print business, I think the question arises, you know, can smaller print businesses gain advantages by understanding the principles, even if their current customers aren't making those demands? What would be your view on that, Laurel, if you can start with this one?
Yeah, in some ways, smaller businesses are a better place to implement this type of thing than really large ones, because they're much closer to their own procedures, to their staff, to their customers. They don't have lots of layers of management. So the beginning is to understand the principles of the standard. The main thing, though, is to have business policies that you are clear on. You know, for things like customers should never have to wait more than a week for an answer to a query. Emails should be responded to within 24 hours or 48 hours. Start with those kind of very basic things. Set acceptable failure rates for color management problems. Set acceptable failure rates for PDFs going through the pre-flight process. All of this stuff is very much bespoke to the business. And in some ways, as I said, if you're smaller, you've got more opportunity to make a big difference quickly. Silly things like, you know, how do you expect your PDFs to be submitted? Are you following a PDFX standard or not? And if not, why not? So you can actually get quite a long way through by looking at your processes. And as I say, if you're a smaller business, that can be much easier than if you're a really large company.
For sure. Okay, Paul.
Yes, I also gives you the opportunity, without spending lots of time and lots of money, to actually compete on an even playing field with the larger companies that may have these standards in place. It can be relatively simple to put in the technical standards to a small printer. As Laurel said, they know their processes. They're probably very aware of their weaknesses, though they don't discuss them much. And it can achieve, one, it achieves lots of savings, and secondly, it can build client confidence just by being able to communicate with your clients on how to supply PDFs.
Mm-hmm.
And give them some training, give some documentation on how to do it, is a very powerful sales tool, let alone everything else. I've seen it numerous times. As I said, it increases client confidence. It gives them a nice warm feeling that they're being looked after. And let alone it improves the quality of your work, and it improve your own efficiencies. You know, it is so, some of these things are so simple. I mean, somebody said to me once, it's as easy to make a correct PDF as an incorrect PDF.
Yes.
And lots of designers don't know how to do it. And again, if you can get through to the people that your clients use, getting that side of it sorted out is quite simple. Having an internal and external color management policy is also part of that. So the PDFs are produced in that correct way. Simple systems of being able to measure tone value increase, dot gain on your presses, whether they be offset or screen, so you can keep your process control correct, is a very simple and relatively straightforward things to do with not a huge amount of investment. On the digital side, you know, being able to produce device profiles, specific device profiles for different substrates, so that you know that substrate A will print on press B and substrate B will print on press C, and you don't have to go back to the same press to try and print the same job all the time. These simple things in the color management area are relatively relatively quick to implement and give huge benefits to both yourselves and your clients.
And I think with the kind of environment that we've been in during this last year, where we're connecting on Zoom, where we can screen share very easily, I know that in my art and photography business, I've had a number of occasions where clients have been uncertain about how files should be submitted, and looking at things like soft proofing to wide gamut profiles that we're using on the kind of CMYK OVG side of printing. And actually, just to book in a 10-minute Zoom call, share screen and show them, and then get them to share their screen and then show you them doing it, is actually a really, really super efficient way of improving that workflow so quickly. So yeah, I think you're right. To me, the ISO standard gives you the compass, and it gives you a methodology that you can rely on because it's been through such strenuous validation. And I think that's why we said in the title of this, avoiding expensive trial and error. This is a really good place to start best practice, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're talking about, sorry, Laurel.
Well, I was just going to say that I think it's really an important point that Graham raises, because an ISO document is about collective knowledge and experience. And that knowledge and experience is not a bunch of bureaucrats in Geneva saying, oh, we think it should be like this, that, or the other. It's actual professional experts. It's actual printing companies, printing people who write these things. And not just people who are doing the printing work, but color scientists, people who have been exposed to lots of different types of print media projects in all sorts of applications. So I guess the point is that any business can trust that what's in that ISO document really does reflect a reality. There's always going to be exceptions. There's always going to be somebody who says, well, no, we don't do it that way because blah, blah, blah. But those exceptions are very rare. Usually doing it that way, blah, 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 has been considered and then deemed to be not representative. So I guess the other thing we didn't mention at all in the early part of this, that in the very early stages of an ISO document's development, one of the key conversations is about the use case. So we've got a lot of standards, as Paul mentioned, within TC 130, some 90 of them. All of them will have had a conversation about what's the point of this? What is the use case? And for the most part, our standards are necessary in the real world. Sorry.
Yeah. Thanks, Laurel. Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, on to our fifth question. And this kind of speaks to implementation, really. So from your experience, can you provide some examples of where adopting standards and certification has had a positive impact on printing companies' commercial success? Now, I appreciate you under NDA in lots of cases, but maybe there's at least something that you can share with us. Laurel, would you like to answer first on this one, please?
Okay, I guess most of our work has, when I look back on it, is actually more with brands than with printing companies. We do work with printing companies, but the most interesting experiences have been with the big brands. And I guess the IKEA case is probably the standout one. The IKEA catalogue is printed at, I don't think they're still printing it, but it was printed at 35,000 different locations around the world. In multiple languages, in multiple run lengths, using multiple processes. So everything from a small digital press right the way through to a gravure press. And the challenge that IKEA had a long time ago was to try and manage the versioning for the catalogue. And the versioning was complicated, not just by language, but by the fact that they had also embedded the equivalent of QA codes, QR codes, except it was in the graphics of the background pictures in the catalogue. So you could take a picture of a sofa and be taken all over the place to different environments to see what you might do with that via your phone. So there were lots of complicated things that were in the catalogue. And what they chose was to use PDF as their variable layer on each of the versions of the catalogue, and to use multiple versions of the PDFs, and then to mirror them at all of the different printing sites. So it was very exciting how they managed to do that, so that they had the most efficient workflow possible, sending all of this data all over the world using PDF as the carrier, and then triggers within each PDF to say where it should go and how it should go and all these sorts of things. And then linking the destinations with the PDF print readiness. So that was one, that was very exciting. We were also involved in a project for Statoil, which is the Norwegian state-owned oil company. And they had a similar sort of problem in that they had lots of different documentation and user manuals and stuff that had to be sent to the rigs and to the processing plants all over Europe. I guess they had them in all over the world, actually. And the manuals all had to be optimized using variable data for each
site.
Each iteration, yeah. Well, and within sites, you'd have the same information appearing in different ways. So we used PDF ET, which is, I think it's PDF X5 or 6, one of them. I can't remember now. Would have been 5. So that was quite exciting. And then the other example I thought about was Tetra Pak, because they used the 12647 series to manage their data so that it was optimized for every different print process that they used on the various substrates, because it had to all be color managed to look exactly the same, so that when you bought Ribena in a little box in one country, it would look the same everywhere. That was another good one.
There was also, didn't you have one on gelato, which was quite well?
Yeah, that was to make sure that all of their digital presses were profiled accurately and that they all printed to the same standard. And what's the other one we talked about? Oh, it's Diageo. Yeah, Diageo is. Oh. We weren't directly involved in this, and we were sort of subsidiary. But the important thing for them was that very high-end whiskies and booze in general, the packaging has to be really yummy, so that you want to spend 100 quid on a bottle of booze. And the package was the thing that they wanted to make sure made you do that. And of course, these really high-end brands use multiple processes. So, there'll be a bit of gravure, there'll be a bit of digital printing, there'll be reflector, there'll be all sorts of things on one package. Yeah. And they can only make that viable if they can keep the process of printing all of those bits and pieces and the embellishments and everything else standardized, because then the cost is manageable. Before, they were doing it without proper standards, and it was all over the place. So it was a real risk to put together a very high-end package. It wouldn't necessarily make their money back.
And when they also start having to deal with that across 30, 40 factories internationally, it becomes an uncontrollable beast, doesn't it? Very fast.
I have a little digression. I was at a lunch in Hong Kong years ago, and sitting next to one of the consultants working for Diageo, and he ordered a Coke. And when it arrived, we looked at it, both of us, and said that red's wrong.
Okay.
Not the right red on the tin. And he was really went and talked to the people and asked for a couple of other Cokes, and looked at them, and somebody got into a lot of trouble for not following Diageo's requirements in Hong Kong, or wherever it was that those cans came from.
Well, I suppose the message of consistency in colour is confidence in brand, isn't it? I mean, it's the psychological value of getting it right to consumers is absolutely immense. It kind of puts me in mind in a far more local example. When you go past down the road from where I live, there are quite a few takeaways, and you always see these really dreadful pictures of either Chinese food or kebabs or things in the window graphics. And it's just it can make an object or a product look absolutely foul and in this case inedible. So
Yes,
you know,
right. I guess the other thing about the Coke Red is that if it's too orange, you're not going to trust that you're getting genuine Coca-Cola.
yeah, you might think it's fake.
Yeah, and that the fraud thing and the fake brand thing is a really important issue because it represents a lot of money that gets lost. So color control and color management is obviously central to that, to making sure that you are getting what you're expecting.
Brilliant, thank you, Laurel. Paul, we've kept you silent for too long, I fear. So
it was quite nice.
Perhaps you'd like to just briefly give us your view of of customers that you've seen benefit from this, and maybe a couple of examples.
Well, overall, it comes back to something I think I was talking about at the beginning of this break. If you use a standard in a positive way, you will gain the advantages, and so will your clients. So I'll take a standard which most people are familiar with, 14,001. If you use that standard to set your aims high, reducing your waste to landfill to zero, if you use it to insulate and check power usage in your company correctly and aim to reduce that, you can obtain a very firm and very quick return on investment. Again, if you use the production standards, your savings in waste, remakes, communications will be high, let alone all the advantages that your clients will see from a consistent product. I mean, FOGRA, who also contribute to the ISO standards groups, have this expression, printing the expected. The expected is printing the expected for the client and the expected for themselves. And by using standards, you can virtually guarantee that. You'll also have some firm diagnostic techniques. So when things go wrong, and they will go wrong, a piece of machinery will start failing, you will have the numbers to tell you where it's failing, and often how it's failing as well, once you understand what you're looking at. Probably the best example I can use of it working in action is with quite a large printer who has litho, he has continuous feed inkjet, he has indigos, he has toner presses, and they put in a system, color management system, and ISO 1264, all based around ISO 1264 7 Part 2, and put out good documentation, started training their clients on how to put files together. And they've seen their internal costs decrease, they've seen their quality become more easily maintained with less wastage, less plate remakes. I mean, in this case, because they're quite a large company, you're heading towards six-figure savings a year. And the response from clients has been amazing. Some of their salesmen have told me they've gained clients, let alone retaining clients, through demonstrating how this system works.
I think when you're getting it right, and when you're working to standards that people expect, and you can speak with absolute confidence about the output that you're producing, it is a compelling sales benefit, isn't it? It really is.
Yes, yeah. I mean, clients still don't understand digital photography. I mean, they view it on very cheap PC screens, not their fault. They don't understand, it's RGB, but what's RGB? And many printers out there will say, give us CMYK, mate, without giving any more information than that. But if as a printer, you know how to handle CMYK images, you know how to convert them correctly to the right, you know how to handle RGB images, you know how to convert to the correct CMYK for your printing process. And as you said, Graham, you can talk confidently to your clients about that, and other people they deal with may or will not be able to. It gives you, a huge advantage, a very small area of knowledge.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, well, look, I think we have covered a lot of ground here. So I think now let's take some questions from today's attendees. So I will just have a look. Okay, one of them is more of a statement than a question. It's a good morning.
Good morning.
David Zamith. So good morning, David. Thank you for joining again. The question that follows that is OCATEX standard. It's fundamental on global exports of fashion textiles, or ISO on automotive interior parts. Yeah, I mean, do either of you have any remarks on that one? I mean, OCATEX is not in itself an ISO standard, but it probably contains components of ISO standards. I would have thought. I'm not really sure.
No, it's not, I'm not too familiar with those areas.
Okay.
I'm not actually sure what question we're being asked, but OCATEX it's called the Standard 100, which is the it's for textiles to make sure they don't have any harmful substances in them, so that when you put on a shirt, you don't get a nasty rash or come out in boils or whatever. But the work on textile standards has not really been done within TC 130. It's done. OCATEX is the main. They're a German organization, I think, and there are within ISO there will be a technical committee that deals with textile standards, but it's not really our remit at the moment. That doesn't mean.
And I do think from a sustainability perspective and transparency perspective that when you know, fashion textiles is a particularly interesting sector for transformation, isn't it? From the sort of established print for stock model to a leaner print on demand model. I think there'll be a huge range of opportunity for standardization in that manufacturing supply chain that will develop as digitization continues apace, because it's a very
well, we are within Working Group 11. We are working on a document that relates to textiles. It's 22067. It's not yet published, and we're at the very early stages with it. But the idea is that we want to specify for a textile printer, whether it's digital or analog, the information about the chemistries and all of the materials used in the print process that should be used to inform other labels, so that they're more robust and more thorough. But as I say, it's very early. Yeah. And it's coming out of Japan, and whether we can get any further on it in the next year or so, I'm not sure. But it's difficult because the textile industry is so enormous, and trying to specify what the requirements should be will be quite difficult for us.
It's interesting. FESPA are working on an RGB for overriding color profile for textiles at the moment.
I think another comment that's made here is about standards being integrated into equipment, prepress, for full automation, and with things like RIPs. I mean, I think that there is still, for me, a bit of a bugbear is that, you know, if you buy take half a dozen different RIP platforms, compare them, you'll find the terminology and there's no such thing as standardization in the way to structure RIP software. And I think it would be a really useful thing to, you know, we are seeing integration, aren't we? We're seeing the standards to be achieved through DFEs, and, you know, that's already integrated. But some of this wider stuff on rendering intents and the naming conventions of different things is still quite vendor specific and sometimes confusing. So I think there are always new areas as technology develops that new standards will be born out of. And as you said earlier, I think quite rightly, is it's ensuring that a use case has enough value and significance over time to go through the process.
Well, that's where it's working in background for the industry. I take your point about people need to be more careful in what they call different elements, but different companies call different things by different names. But if you look at complete workflow, whether it's going to digital or analog, I mean, every part of that workflow will contain elements of an ISO standard for color management, for PDF, for process control. I mean, if it's a complete workflow, down to the way it's putting dot gain curves into the RIP to produce the screen or the printing plate. Everything's covered by a standard, whether you like it or not. And if you can implement those more actively yourself, which I think has been one of the main fuss of this coffee break, then you can add your own benefits into your workflow by understanding it. But I do take your point, Graham, and I actually did a blog on it on my website, many years ago, just so asking for people, especially in the color management area, to have a more common naming policy. I mean, is it an output profile? Is it a simulation profile? What are you calling it? What is it doing? And that's what I do for a living, but I get confused sometimes by different menus.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because with the whole RIP discussion, vendors want to be able to have something proprietary and unique. They want to have a competitive advantage
in their features and benefits set.
Yeah, but also in the way the whole engine works and what kind of platform it provides for development or growth or change or whatever. So there's that, but then there's also the fact that as the graphics industry is now part of, we're a subset within the computing industry, and advances in computing over the last few years in terms of graphics rendering or color control or whatever, it began with Apple and Microsoft years and years ago. And they've never stopped improving and making changes to enhance the performance of their products and the things that people make using their products. And they have relied on ISO standards as references to that. We didn't talk about this earlier, but within the ISO model, there are you can have joint working groups where you work with another committee, so that a lot of the this is a bit off of my map, but a lot of the standards that relate to image processing and image management are done in a joint working group with the photography people within ISO. So, and in fact, one of the standards that we developed within Working Group 11, we worked with the IEC, one of the IEC committees, which was for data management, basically how the computer people manage their data rather than purely graphics people. So there's a lot of, as Paul says, an awful lot of stuff that happens in the background that has been implemented as part of the evolution of computing.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, well, look, I'm just looking at the clock, and we're doing quite well. We're doing better than usual in terms of keeping to time today. I would say a big thank you for all our attendees for participating. I hope that you'll come back and join us in the next of our second series of coffee breaks in June, when we'll be looking at circular thinking. That's with Claire Taylor and Nathan Swinson-Buller from Claire Taylor Consulting and Image Co. There'll be registration links sent out in due course. If you're interested in watching this webinar, please feel free to check out our YouTube channel, FESPA TV, where it can be found from tomorrow. If you enjoyed it, by all means, it'd be great if you would share the link with anyone else that you think may benefit from watching it. There will be a survey sent out following this webinar. We'd ask if you wouldn't mind, please fill it out, send it back. We benefit enormously from your feedback, and it's really helpful just to guide content and our approach. I think that just leaves me to say thank you again to all our attendees. And Paul and Laurel, thank you so much for your contribution today. It is massively appreciated. And at FESPA, with this coffee breaks, our intention is to help printers get better faster, and I think your contribution has met that remit. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having us.
Bye. Yeah, it's been fun. Bye.
Cheers. Bye bye. Bye.
Bye.